The early 80s, the first of what became 3 regional force surveillance units were created. So that was the Northwest Mobile Force, or Norforce, and that's about 1.8 million square kilometres they cover through all of the Northern Territory and out into the Kimberley. And shortly thereafter, the Pilbara Regiment was formed, doing the same sort of thing, and they cover the Pilbara region of West Australia, about 1.2, 1.4 million square kilometres. And then by the mid to late 80s, the third of the units was formed, and it was a rebadged unit that had existed from the First World War, the 51st Battalion, and it covers all of the Cape York and Torres Strait right up to Papua New Guinea. It's the baby. It's about 650,000 square kilometres, but it's got the complexities of rainforest, desert, Western Cape, and the archipelago of the Torres. So those 3 units comprise the RFSG, which is the Regional Force Surveillance Group, and that's Australia's long-range reconnaissance group that primarily focuses on domestic. Because of the sort of distances they cover, I just sort of mentioned how big the units were, it's quite difficult to get army people from the capital cities to go into those areas and not just survive, but function. And so General Jeffrey's idea of drawing from communities pushed the army to have a presence in places where it might otherwise not have. And from about then, mid-80s, through to a handful of years ago, it peaked and troughed, but tickled along. There's probably been a bit of focus on border protection operations and cultural diversity and a few other things that serendipitously have put the RFSUs back into the spotlight, but they never went away. And certainly the presence in the communities probably never went away. And when we talk about, RG's Norman and Charlie Baird from Wujal Wujal, it's 105 years ago that they were serving. So they remembered us. We just didn't remember them.
When they first come back, Major Josh Mickle, brother Josh, come through. He was actually on his way to Cooktown and Hopevale. So he was passing through, but they ended up camping the night, and then we caught up the next day for yarn. And what was really interesting was when, because I was thinking, well, how are we going to connect in, with this army mob, and that, and I said, so what do you believe in? What's your motto? And he said, love of country leads me. Bingo. As soon as brother said that, I thought, okay, we've got an in here. What I didn't realise when I spoke to the nannies, like Nanny Kathleen Walker, Nanny Murray Shipton, Nanny Doreen Ball, Nanny Lillian Yugi, all of them said, yo, granddaughter, we got history with army, your Ajis there, they went across long time ago. And then that's when I started yarning with brother Josh. I said, hey, we got connection here. And our way is, if we eat from the same plate, you family. So for them it was very, their family. They all ate from the same plate, because if I don't trust you, I won't eat with you, because I don't want to eat your badness. So when we found out how that connection was, and it was the same mob, we thought, meant to be, we're meant to join back. And at that time, we were really struggling as a community with, family violence issues. Like a lot of our Cape communities, and a lot of other communities elsewhere, and because of generational unemployment, so obviously ancestors have brought them full circle. We were meant to connect in. And what the grannies always said, and same with the other Ajis there today, was that we have to remember we have a shared history. So when we talk about for the theme for this year around, always was, always will be, for us it was about remembering family. Always was, always will be, for family. So, and that's part of the beautiful thing we've been journeying. And so during the last few years, and especially during COVID, you're now starting to see that resurgence within the other communities where they're starting to remember, starting to reconnect. And how powerful it was at Kowanyama, at their checkpoint there. You had local community soldiers, that had gone through enlistment, that were actually there, protecting country, and providing a community education. And they had the support of their non-Indigenous brothers, and sisters from elsewhere. Like that was a very powerful message going out. So I think it's that shared learning.
You know, on the back of what Eileen said, and it's perhaps not unique just to the rainforest mob, that where family members have served before, and you can show them that there's a history of, you know, us working together, you can break down some of the barriers that exist and speed up trust. And that's, if there are, you know, a handful of lessons that I've learned working with communities, trust is key. There's been a lot of people come and go over the years, and a lot of promises made, not all of them delivered. But where you can get a main line on trust, your uncle served with us back when, you know, I found that helps. You know, and you can get straight to the heart of the culture, and you can dispense with some of the usual pleasantries, but not always as productive conversation, and get straight into what can we do with you, and what can you do with us, and how can we both help one another. If it's generational unemployment, if it's skilling. But I think the bigger message and the bigger lesson that we've learned is just cultural understanding, and if we, you know, use the word reconciliation in its truest sense, I think that's what we're about. And when you're working side by side on a checkpoint in Kawanyama, there's a local kid who was recruited from a couple of streets away, and a young fella who may have come from Cairns or Townsville or somewhere else, and there's no distinction between them. They're just two people going about their job who've been trained well and know how to get along. And they carry a little bit of that understanding back to community. And, you know, the young fella from the Big Smoke, he's going to understand a little bit more about remote community life. And remote community people, they'll have a bit more understanding of where the city folk are coming from, and it helps break down those barriers. The program that you've been running with the War Memorial to help units like the one I commanded connect with country, to find out where their ancestors had served, because I mentioned a short time ago, Army's been busy and it's a progressive organisation, and it doesn't always take the time to reflect. And so we've forgotten a lot of the people who've served with us and sacrificed for us. But the War Memorial is a repository, and they have some of that information. And through some of the good work we've been able to do with yourself, I've been able to ring up and say, yeah, Michael, I'm thinking of going into a community. Can you tell me who may have served and what that presence was like? And if we can start to connect the dots with families in that community, with their ancestors who've served, we can really make a respectful impact, and from the get-go, recognise that they have served, as opposed to walking in blind as we did with Wujal Wujal, and then finding out after the fact that actually there's a strong history of service here. So I think that's part of it. And the next part of that is an open curiosity and a respectfulness that we don't know everything, and you couldn't hope to in all the fields that we would cover in the career in the military. And cultural competence is part of that. And I've talked before with Sister about understanding how to understand, and it's a lesson that I think a lot of us could learn. And it starts with knowing that you don't know everything. And certainly when it comes to Indigenous cultures, you know, I grew up in Dharawal country, and it wasn't part of the curriculum there. You know, we didn't learn about country where I was from when I was at school. It's something I've learned as an adult. And the more I've learned, the more I've wanted to learn. And when you're open to learning, you realise that knowledge can come from anywhere. And so when we've moved into Wujal Wujal, we've been sharing some of our skills and experience with the locals, and in return they've been very generously sharing some of their knowledge of country, skills and experience with us. And as it turns out, the expertise aren't always with the elderly and the senior people. And as I mentioned in my presentation, Neil Sykes, Clayton Baird, young soldiers that we'd recruited into the unit. But they're movers and shakers in community and in their family groups. And so, here I am as a senior officer, taking a knee before a private who's only been in the military for a year. And he respects the fact that I've probably got a little more military knowledge than him, just as I respect the fact that he has got a lot more cultural knowledge than I could hope to have. And we can learn from one another, and that's what we do, usually over deep fried scones on the back deck.
Yo. so some of the mob that are listening, when 51 would come visit us for training, we have mobile training teams that would come through and do training with us, and our custom is this, to break bread. So you'd have these war, hardened soldiers, and you'd hear them on the phone saying, Nanny Murray or Nanny Kathleen, I've got the flour and I've got the Auntie Mary's baking powder for you, mob. And then when they come up, the grannies will make them fried scone with syrup, or damp. If they're very good, they'll get the big damper, and that's symbolic because, we trust you, your family, we share with you. I think the other thing that, within Army, we talk about what is cultural intelligence. That's a big thing at the moment. Here you've got a perfect opportunity where we're doing that, symbiotically, with each other. And it's been good both ways. I've certainly learnt a lot being within, as a reservist. It's definitely helped me in terms of, me getting confidence as a leader within my community. But what I've also been really humbled by is the opportunity from defence family also learning from us as well, and that's resonated a lot within the communities. Yeah.
But it's interesting. So militaries tend to serve overseas, and we think culture exists somewhere offshore. We forget sometimes that it exists in Australia. Always has and always will exist here. But some of the lessons that we can learn here at our doorstep, we can apply overseas. And a good one that we learnt working with Eileen on her recruit course, actually, when we recruited Eileen, she was the CEO of community, and so you can imagine she's well respected in town, and there's a whole bunch of 17, 18-year-old men and women, and we're making them all do push-ups and run around, and just as recruit trainers are taught down at the school at Kapooka, there's a lot of shouting. We didn't really appreciate it, but we do tend to shout a bit sometimes. And I remember overhearing Eileen talk, and you want to tell it?
We thought the mob were deaf, and we we were feeling sorry for them, and I said, and them mob reckon, they proper, must be that's why they're yelling, they proper deaf. Oh, nyon poor things, poor things. Not knowing that that's them.
So they kept feeling sorry for us, and we're like, why are you feeling sorry for us? And just do your damn push-ups. Okay, I'll do your push-up. But so we started to learn that, speaking louder and slower isn't the best way to communicate across languages or across cultures, and you need to adapt and be adaptive to the modalities of the audience, and so we've learnt that. We've learnt to teach the parts of a weapon and how to fire a rifle, referencing sharks. They're sea country, and in some of the remote communities where English is, a third or fourth or fifth language, it's certainly not used around home. They have a very literal understanding of it. So if you were to say, I need you to get the magazine and bit the bullets are in, put that into the weapon and grab the barrel and point that down here and cock it and put the round into the chamber. Well, a magazine is a book, and a barrel is a drum that you would store liquid in, and a round is a circle. So I'm telling them to put the book into the drum and get the circle into it. Like, it makes no sense. And for weeks we talked louder and slower. We tried being more tactile and using our hands. It didn't work. And we got a good friend of ours, Dr. Tim White, who's lived on the Cape, speaks several languages, and we said, Tim, we're kind of stuck here. And he said, I'll come out and I'll have a look. And he spent an evening with the lads and the ladies, and he taught them, hey, so when the weapon is like this, we're doing the degrees of weapon readiness, when the weapon is totally safe, all the way through to if you pull the trigger, a bullet's going to come out. And he's like, when the weapon's totally safe, it's like a gummy shark, it's got no teeth, it's not going to hurt you. And Oh, okay, and when the weapon's like this, it's like a grey nurse. It's got teeth, but it's not going to bite. Oh, and when it's like this, it's a tiger shark. Whee!
Yeah.
So I would never have thought to teach this by sharks, but it's all about being adaptive. And it worked, 2 weeks we tried to get them through these particular tests. We couldn't. An evening with Whitey and all of a sudden they're good to go. So it's all part of the journey,
So for some languages, just picking up what Brother Rick said too, like for some of our languages, like Nguki Metero, which is the Hopevale language that we speak, and also for some languages, like in Western Cape York, we have what we call cardinal directions. So we don't have, in English you'd say front and back, left or right. So I am east of Brother Tim. So in army speak, don't come behind my rear, like keep, and so we're like, what? We just can't. So it makes it hard when they were trying to give direction. So we had to give examples as well. So which is interesting.
So one of the more powerful ways we taught that afterwards is at the beginning of each year we'd get Brother Jay from up the Tablelands to come down and teach us how to build a spear, but in language. And so we're now on the receiving end of it, and he speaks slower and louder. I got no idea what I'm doing, and I came out with his mongrel-looking stick with something on the end of it. I wouldn't have survived contact with a bloody jellyfish. But anyway, the lesson was learnt. How to talk across language, and then this lesson that. We do it in fun and we have a great time, and we've learned a whole bunch about the locals. When we are asked to go overseas, as we often are, and we're in East Timors or the Solomons or Iraqs and Afghanistans, the same principles apply. We're talking across languages, we're talking across cultures, and it might not be teaching people how to use weapons using sharks. It might be something totally different that we haven't thought of yet, but we're open to thinking about that. We're open to thinking about what we haven't thought of, and we've understood how to understand other cultures. Powerful lesson. Makes Army more capable, both in the conduct of what we do and then as humans and then as individuals. When I hang the uniform up at the end of the day, I don't stop talking to sister here or community. And likewise, once the nannies get your phone number, it's not like they're ever going to lose it. You're on speed dial. You'd be an Uber every time you go into town.
Especially football season.
Yeah.
The most humbling time was when we came here in 2018. We won Defence Award for community work nationally, and because here is very special. We talk back home, there are certain places on country that you remember. You can connect back with your ancestors. And I remember when we came here, and I'd never been here before, and some of us, we had Brother Clayton, Sister Dallas, we come and, Nanny Murray had come too. And we just were very quiet coming in, and you could feel mob here, like their spirits talking, and that was very powerful. And I think that was talking about it, very passionate, made me feel very humbled to see that shared story was here, and that we're still on that journey, and everything happens for a reason. And so whatever we were meant to see and feel was here calling, and them Ajis brought us back to find family that we had forgotten to connect with, but they found us, Lord, and that was meant to be. What's been very humbling the last few years is seeing those young fellas and even some of our older ones going on back on that journey to feel strength, to feel good about themselves, to know that they're being reciprocated in terms of the respect. And you can see in those communities that have embraced, with their defence family, But at the same time, you're also seeing it being reciprocated in defence family, that they've changed. And you hear it in the language that they use. Like, first time I met brother, he used words that I couldn't connect with. Now you can't shut him up. He like, go over Mark for talk, And that's that yarn. So we're all learning from each other. We're growing from each other. There are going to be some challenging points and times in history that we need to, but that respect is there, and you can talk that truth. Yeah. I think coming here, because this is a keeping place, and it's not only non-Indigenous mob that are here, that their presence is here. It's also our family that's here, and they are family, and that's that. Always was, always will be family, and that's, for me, that's powerful.
Yeah, I really agree. I think this year's NAIDOC theme is really on point, and it's really on point for places like the War Memorial. Always was, always will be. You are the always was. I am the always will be in that. And I think it's great to be able to come here, reflect back on the ancestors and service that's happened, and then carry it forward, together. I think there is a long way to go. Always is. And it's a journey I don't think that has a destination. Reconciliation doesn't stop. You don't say we're reconciled and we're just done. It's a constant practice, kind of like keeping fit for the military folk. You don't just say I'm fit and I don't have to train anymore. You got to train every day. You want to be fit. If you want to be smart, you've got to keep reading books. You don't just put them down when you think you've had enough. This is the same. And inside of that journey, there are the next steps. The current Chief of Defence, General Campbell, once said to us that when we're looking at how we conduct ourselves, you've got the law and you've got our morals and ethics, and everything in the middle tends to be policy. It's up for grabs. We own it, we can change it, and we can flex it. One of the more proud moments I can remember in Army is we had an issue where the policy was going to not be in line with community's expectations. Policy would have had a bad outcome. We would have had to discharge one of our men who had trained, had been hard, been an exemplar, and done everything we'd asked of him. But for a paragraph that was written with a different audience in mind, it was being applied, I thought, out of context. And so I rang Sister. I had a hard time. I'd rung my bosses and my boss's bosses to try and find a way where we could interpret this policy to keep this particular soldier. And at every point, Army said to us, no, the policy is the policy, it must stay. And with General Campbell's comments in mind, I rang Sister and said, hey, help me. I'm stuck. I'm commanding this big unit, hundreds of soldiers. I want to keep this soldier, but I just don't have the right tools or way to communicate it. And she said, well, okay, in the Army, if one of your soldiers stumbles, do you just leave him there? And you're like, no, you pick him up. Yeah, and you support him, right? I said, yeah, that's what we do. She goes, well, there you go. And so I got back on the phone. I started ringing the generals in Canberra again. I said, look, we can't just drop this person. They've stumbled. It's our job to help pick them up. They're part of the team. We have to show that we value them and we don't discard people. And sure enough, Army heard it this time, and we were able to adjust policy. Now, policy's there for a reason, and it's been created with the best intent in mind. We just need to refresh it in the context. And when we're dealing with soldiers who have been educated through the metropolitan school system, and they're perfectly literate or near enough to, and have a different standard of living, the policy may work there. But if you're out in Kowanyama or Doomadgee or Mornington Island or any of the number of places, the APY land, over in Jigalong, the policy, the context is different, and we just need to keep that in mind. So this journey that we're on, the next bounds are, how do we look at policy? How do we look at policy in a more agile way? That's something the organisation can work on. Something that we individuals can work on is just maintaining our friendships. It can be hard. it can be hard to do when you move away, because getting into remote community is tricky and it's expensive. I've been fortunate to get back once or twice, and community really welcomed me when I did get back. It was a really nice thing. COVID's probably helped. COVID has forced everyone onto social media. It's forced us onto our phones more because we can't catch up for the weekend, so we are dialing in. And that, I think, has been good. It's, I think, strengthened some of the connections with the community people, Nanamara in particular, up until the point the Cowboys lost. But it's football, and she'll pick a better team next year, I'm sure.
And there's always that of origins. I think the other thing, and I forgot to mention it earlier, was when we talk in language, so some of our language, like Eastern Cape York, we don't have a word for stranger, and Western Cape York, they don't have a word for friend. So if we look at Western Cape York first, some of their languages, when they don't have, if you come to community, like Uncle, you might come to community, and mob will look at you and try and understand who you are. The dilemma is, well, do we put Uncle as family, and which skin name will he go to, or which clan group will he go with, or story, or is he stranger? And if he's stranger, and some of our agencies have bad history, or what we call unfinished business, they haven't dealt with that, they're going to have that culture clash straight up. Okay, but when we put you as family, a lot of things that go with that. And when you come to Eastern Cape York, we're a little bit different. We don't have a word for stranger. We have Jawun or Dawun, like friend of your spirit, your wawu. So even if you're mongrel, we'll still claim you, So you got both extremes. What's been interesting is that word trauma. So we talk a lot in our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities around intergenerational trauma and how it manifests itself, through our time. But we also have trauma within our defence families. And so when you get people who have trauma in community meet trauma from defence family, there's that shared understanding, and you'll see it in terms of how they communicate. There's that sharing. Trauma recognises trauma. Trauma heals each other sometimes because they've got that. And, that's been humbling as well, So we've had to support each other.
Yeah. And I think being adopted by, the families of Wujul Wujul and sort of Eastern Cape means that when we've gone to share, we can share more openly, more honestly. When we've gone to move about the country, we can be placed now. If we're working over in Wit Country, we don't have to be a stranger. We're family. We're family of the Gugu Nungu, Gugu Yalanji, Gugu Jalanji mob, and they'll call ahead and they'll say, hey, these are our family coming through. The responsibility on us is, culture-wise, especially up north, if we're disrespectful or if we don't adhere to the laws of community and culture, they're not going to growl at us. They're too polite to do that. They'll pick up the phone and they'll growl
They'll
family.
growl me.
Yeah,
so
that's right.
rather muck up, they'll get it. Hey, you didn't learn him the right way, And so, always was, always will be is also about we got to learn them on this journey the right way.
And so, the responsibilities we carry forward is if we're going to embrace being family, if we're going to, ask that we be placed if we're moving into other communities, then we have that responsibility to learn culture and respectfully apply it and continually learn culture because it doesn't stop. So that responsibility we take quite seriously, and that's part of this connection and part of the responsibility and part of the journey, and we're all on. But I think that's probably a powerful point too.